Hi, I'm Lynn McClelland. I'm a reference librarian. I will be seeing you all live September 10th for a in-class exercise. In preparation for that, I'd like to talk to you about secondary sources, what they are, why you want them, and how to find and use them. So a secondary source is something in contrast to primary law, which are the cases, the statutes, the regulations. They are not the law themselves. What they are sources that describe the law or describe legal topics. They're written by a wide variety of people. Some secondary sources are more practical, which is what we're going to focus on for these slides, these lectures. And there are more scholarly sources as well. Since you guys are going to have to look at scholarly sources to do your SAW requirement, your substantial and local writing requirement, for scholarly sources, I highly recommend taking a look at a library workshop we did last year, a lot of the materials for which are still online at this guide. The important thing to know in terms of searching for secondary sources, or one important thing to know, is that unlike primary law, which you can find case law in lots and lots of places, a lot of the secondary sources are going to be unique to just one platform because these are published by different legal publishers. And there are actually some that are still print only. So you can see there's a whole lot of types of secondary sources. You read about some of them in your reading for class, or you will read about them. If you watch the short UVA video in preparation for Friday, you'll see them talk briefly about a small number of these. So once we get through this intro video, the rest of the videos are going to be a quick gallop through a whole lot of kinds of secondary sources. The reason why you would want secondary sources, even though they are not primary law, is that they're usually the best way to start your research. It saves you a huge amount of time, right? If somebody has already pulled together a sort of plain language, or at least plain language-ish, explanation on a particular area of law that gives you cites to cases, statutes, everything on point, and some of them even give you practice tips, use that and don't spend hours and hours recreating what somebody else has already done, at least as a starting place. It's also a great way to learn the language of the area of law that you're in. Every little sub-branch of the law has its own terms of art, its own lingo, its own acronyms, and you'll find those as you go through secondary sources. And so that will help you when you're doing searches in primary law. When you're looking for how a case talks about something, it might not, or how a statute talks about something, it might not be the way that you would think about how you would talk about it just from thinking of everyday language. And secondary sources have a lot of cross-references, and we'll get more in depth into things. And so it's a great way to spot new issues, as we'll see as we go through. So if we start with this hypothetical as a way to make this a little bit less abstract and actually look at some sources, this was actually something that happened. We're going to pretend this was in California, even though the television show takes place in New York. Let's say your client is part of a tribal council member from this federally recognized tribe that runs a casino, and was depicted in this television show, which is Billions, which I hate to say I haven't actually seen, but after this, I'm going to go watch this episode. They were depicted as being really shady. And your client was depicted in particular as being a corrupt official bribing a politician. The episode uses your client's actual last name, changes your client's gender and first name. So the lady on the right there is the fictional depiction of your client. Your client wants to know if he can file a defamation suit with these facts. So where would you start with this? You've probably tried doing this. You've probably tried just popping a keyword into West or Lexis, into that sort of federated Google-like search bar that they have on the first page that searches everything. You just pop in a keyword and see what happens, right? You've at least narrowed it to your jurisdiction. You know, you're in California. So maybe that'll help a little bit. You've probably tried this and probably gotten results a lot like this. So when you see that 10,000, that's the system limit. Any results in excess of 10,000 results just get tossed out by the system. You don't know whether those are good cases that you would have actually wanted or not. And nobody wants to sort through 53,000 results. So this is why you don't want to just pop a word into the search and see what happens. As you start to pop your word into the search, you'll see these suggestions come up. So why not just go with those? at least you get real numbers. So this is a little bit better. But these results are generated by AI, and it is still AI in training. And you probably have better things to do than help West do that. Particularly since, as you can see, the AI maybe not so great yet, because you're in California. You've told it you're in California, but it's still giving you a bankruptcy case from the Southern District of New York, which is probably not the best place to start for a California torts case. Lest you think I am just beating up on West, Lexis's searching isn't any better. So they're both totally disorganized. And again, I've narrowed it to California. My top result is still from Florida. And now I don't want to say that this strategy never works. I'm sure you've had this work in the past as well. And especially if you have a really narrow topic, you can sometimes get good results this way. But I'm also sure that you've tried this and had it be really frustrating. A better way to search is usually to try to find a good source and keyword search just within that source instead of searching across the whole platform. The reason why you're here is to figure out how to find those kinds of sources. When you're not sure what source to start with, don't be afraid to ask an expert. If your firm has a librarian, talk to the librarian while you're here. Certainly come talk to us. We're happy to talk about sources. But other attorneys are also a good source to figure out where to begin. When someone hands you an assignment, don't be afraid to ask them if there are particular secondary secondary sources that they really like, practice guides, treatises. That's a great question to ask. People will want to share that information with you. Research guides are also a great way to start. It's a little bit like talking to a librarian. It's something that someone has already pulled together. So if there happens to be one in a subject area that you're interested in, that's great. That's usually a really, really great way to start. And then you can browse databases. So instead of searching across all of West or Lexis, I'll show you how to search for just individual sources. There are also some of these other platforms that have secondary sources in them. We're going to look at CEB in particular because it's really great in California for practice guides. And then just a handful of others. I have a couple of screenshots from Cheetah, which is one that I actually used a lot because I did healthcare law, and that's one of the areas it's particularly strong in. Checkpoint RIA is great for people that want to do tax, and PLI is another sort of cross-discipline source. And we'll also look at how to search library catalogs. From your reading from the UVA video, you saw them talk about treatises and practice guides. There's not this like super bright line rule. It's probably better to sort of talk about this by example. Treatises tend to be more scholarly, more academic. They tend to be in sort of subject matter areas. They're cross-jurisdictional a lot of the time, although Miller and Starr, most people would call it a treatise, and it is really specifically on California real estate. It's like probably the leading California real estate treatise. Witkin is another leading California treatise that we'll look at in the next set of slides, and it's definitely cross-discipline. And then practice guides tend to have more sort of practical information in them, practice tips. We'll look and I think you'll see as we sort of go through them what gets called a treatise and what gets called a practice guide. I mentioned lab guides. In particular, we have this secondary and practice guide that will tell you what we have access to that we recommend in particular subject matter areas. So use it all the time. It's great. I go to it all the time. And you'll see if we look under torts, there are a couple of guides specifically just on defamation. So there are a couple of treatises just on defamation. And you'll also see that we'll tell you what we have available electronically, what database it's in, and then if we do have it in print as well, what the call number is. And those links, those are links to the databases. So you can click that link to actually get to the guides. There's a link to Georgetown's Treatise Finder, which is also really good if you're looking for another guide to sort of help you through particular subject areas. When you are in either Lexis or West, you can start to type a word in that big federated search bar, and it will pull up sources for you that it thinks match that keyword. In Lexis, defamation didn't do me any good, but I was able to find sources that are just on torts. The other way you can look for treatises and practice guides in Lexis is to navigate to this link under secondary materials from the homepage for treatises and guides. And then you can either keyword search just within this subsection of what's in Lexis, that are the treatises and guides, or you could refine further by practice area or by state. In West, same thing, right? You can start to type into that main search bar and let it start to populate, and then you select secondary sources, and you can see what's available under content pages. As practice areas as well, and that's a good way to find sources. However, when I went into that practice areas, in this particular case, there wasn't torts, there wasn't personal injury like Lexis. There's a secondary sources link. You have to drill into that to get to texts and treatises, or again, you could drill in by state. I drilled in by state and then subject matter, and I was able to filter once I had drilled in by state to torts and personal injury. You can see it shows me here on the side that law of defamation that we had found through the secondary source guide, the secondary source live guide. If you do it this way, you'll notice that like you're pulling up all kinds of things, which is kind of nice. This is a practice guide. We'll look at the rudder guides in the next slides. You're also pulling up a newsletter. You're pulling up an encyclopedia. Well, how do I know what these things are? If it's a source you're unfamiliar with, look for that little eye in a circle. And once you click into there, you'll get more information and it will explain to you what the source is. And Lexis has this as well. A lot of databases have this kind of source information in it. So when you see this little eye in a circle, or sometimes it's an eye in a square icon, always click into those to get like coverage dates and a description of what the source actually is. So hornbooks in nutshells we're just going to talk about in this video because they're really sort of more student materials, and you're going to find those in a different database or either through West Academic or in our catalog. Hornbooks are kind of, you'll see West Academic calls them hornbook treatises. They're kind of a more stripped down version of something kind of like a treatise. So, but they can sometimes be helpful for anyone because they are written in sort of plainer language. I actually kept my administrative law hornbook from when I was a student and actually used it in practice. These can be, they can be helpful. And the nutshells are even shorter. They're probably not going to be super helpful to you other than as a student because they're really bare bones and there aren't a lot of references in them. So to get to those, a lot of them are going to be in the West Academic Study Aid subscription. And you sign up from that separately from Westlaw. If you didn't do it in your first year, I highly recommend doing it now because there's really great study material. So if we look at this hornbook on torts, even though this is pretty simple and meant for students, there's a lot in here and it's really great. This of and concerning, right? You're starting to see terms of art. Oh, look, works of fiction thought to be understood as referring to a living plaintiff present special issues. So right there, there's like that's helpful for issue spotting with a source for where to start. So it gives you, by the same author, the longer treatise that they have participated in. And so if you wanted to get a little more detail, you could look in their treatise. It does also give you lots of case law to look at. It gives you a citation to a restatement. We'll talk about those in the last video. You'll notice that this isn't jurisdiction specific. These are sort of like broad nationwide. So the nutshell, even shorter, not a lot in here, only that citation to the restatement. So if you really just need something like super, super quick to understand the bare bones of something, nutshells are fine. They're not going to be super helpful in practice though. But I will though use them to show you how to look for books in our library catalog. This catalog just debuted in July. So if you have questions about it, definitely send those questions to us. So far, I think the catalog's great. For online materials, you could filter that way. You can also filter just by books. I will show you one nice thing you can do in our catalog that's actually a really helpful way to search our library catalog and catalogs in general. So if I go into this book on exempt organizations, on charitable organizations, you'll notice these subject matter headings. You can go click just on those and then you'll see more materials on that subject. This is a way that you could find some of those print-only treatises that we may have. I've clicked into that one of those subject matter headings, and you could see, right, again, I could just narrow it to just see books that we have available in the law library. And that, in a quick nutshell, is some of the basic ways to find sources. Next lecture, we're going to look at some specific treatises and practice guides and a few other sources as well. So I'm really looking forward to seeing you again in a minute.